one political party didn't create them at all. Like, they are completely bipartisan. If you look year over year, rules for this, mandatory reporting, all these rules for child welfare, you'll see a pretty even split in the interests.
Did you feel that they thought you were a threat? Not that you were yourself, but did you feel like people treated you as a threat?
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, that's a closed-ended question, by the way. That's not a good question. To what degree, and can you give us an example? To what degree are you different? We go back to this time.
Different than what?
Different than other people around you. Like your siblings, other people that you saw and who were in foster care, and like, to what degree are you, to what degree is it here? And the reason I'm asking you this is because
you should invest in communities' ability to raise children, because the system doesn't know how to raise children. I mean, they can do enforcement. System's pretty good at, like, oh, you need us to run and, like, catch somebody or investigate somebody. They can do that. But when it comes to actually raising children, helping families, they just don't typically do a good job with that. So for me, this is just for me, bro. Education, saving grace. Education was the 100% saving grace for me. It took me out of the environment initially, so coming out to Penn State. But on top of that, it gave me some tools.
Like, we have moved toward, in this kind of Trump anti-DEI world, like, we can no longer talk about race. We can't use race to explain anything, so we have to completely abandon it. It's like, no, it's still in play.
Unfortunately, the reason why we have to talk about race when it comes to child abuse and neglect is because black families, they're more likely to be investigated by the system than not. And it sounds crazy because black people are 14% at best of the U.S. population. I think you probably know that.
So 53% of black children experience an investigation by Child Protective Services.
Right. And if you listen to the numbers I gave before, I said there's a hotline. People call a hotline. I think I've seen something. You should probably go and investigate. Usually what happens is professionals go through those calls and they say no. 3% of those calls result in any sort of action. So even an investigation, only 3% of them end up being an investigation. So if you look at these numbers, that means that black people are getting a lot of attention from child welfare and child protective services. And that's just the way it ended up being, right? I mean, if you look at these systems, the development of the child welfare system, one political party didn't create them at all. Like, they are completely bipartisan. If you look year over year, rules for this, mandatory reporting, all these rules for child welfare, you'll see a pretty even split in the interests that have created them. Even my organization, we're a bipartisan, nonpartisan organization. Policy for child welfare comes from both sides of the fence. But when you look at the information, the data, what you see is like real hotspot. There's a lot of attention on this community. And because the numbers are so dramatically crazy, it's like, we've got to talk about the race thing. It ends up where we have to talk about it.
Yeah.
If black people were like 30 or 40% of the U.S. population, and it was this concentrated of investigation, you could say, well, they got some issues. But because it's so low, it's like, we have to talk about the race thing.
Well, so for me, 53% of, this is upper class, upper middle class, working class, lower class. This is across the board.
Yeah.
53% is such a significant number, because what it means is that when I'm looking at the two of you, I'm just looking, I'm seeing something with Addie here that I'm not seeing with David. I look at Takeem, I just see something with Takeem. So then we went, okay, what's going on? And when you think about like entering the system, you were talking about your friend. It's like once that doorway opens and you're investigated, things can just start happening and they spiral and they move. And now you're in different systems, you're in courts, you're in all sorts of places. So here, This would be an example of race. Like, that we need to be thinking about race, and suddenly we're saying, like, hey, wait, hang on, maybe race doesn't matter anymore. But no, it matters in lots of these different ways.
Yeah, and I mean, a good, another thing you could think about in the U.S., I think you all know that the Latino population is growing in the U.S. It's been growing over years. It's it's kind of a number that's been going up. But when you look at CPS investigations of Latino families, it's not the same, right? And I think there is something there. I think there's understanding there that's like, hey, we got to protect ourselves, that black people aren't able to do.
And that Asian families are able to do.
Yep.
And Asian families, being more likely to be new immigrants, are sort of on the outside a little bit. Like so many people are more like the foreigners, more like kind of it's able to escape the system. Do either of you have any thoughts about those numbers just off the top of your head? You don't have to, but it seems so significant.
I think it kind of, not that it makes sense, but I mean, being a minority myself, I definitely see the numbers like in real time. My family actually had an investigation by Child Protective Services a couple years back, and I definitely agreed when you said, like, once that door opens, it kind of, anything can happen from there, and you kind of always want to be wary because now you had that experience, and that's something that's really scary, especially in the moment, because you really have no idea what's going to happen next. Especially for me being the eldest, I really had no clue what was in store for my younger siblings because I have 3 of them. And so I think I look at this and I acknowledge that I'm part of the minority, but I also acknowledge that some people that aren't will never really understand it or will never see it. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that goes with a lot of other issues as well, not just this. Yeah. But that's like from my perspective.
Yeah, it's like I think when different students come to me, I assume I assume that I'm treating you equally. Like, I make that assumption in my mind. Come on, man, I'm a good person. I've been around this. I teach Social 119. I'm making the assumption I'm going to treat everybody the same. But the data show me that that's not necessarily true. That maybe you treat women a little bit differently than men. Maybe you treat hijabi women differently than you treat women who are not hijabi. Maybe this, maybe that. And so it becomes this thing where it's got to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, and I think the way it functions is, I think this is an area where it becomes purely systemic. It becomes purely about what are the prevailing narratives, how do we instinctually look at certain communities and certain families, and then what do we do about it when we see it?
Well, did you feel growing up as a young black man, did you feel that they thought you were a threat? Not that you were yourself, but did you feel like people treated you as a threat?
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, that's a closed-ended question, by the way. That's not a good question. To what degree, and can you give us an example?
Yeah, I mean, the first example is just like going shopping. Like, I like to look at nice things. I think I wanted to have expensive taste. I don't know if any of you can relate to that. I wanted to have expensive taste. So I used to want to go into expensive places and look at stuff and just like check things out, fantasize a little bit. And I would just get hawked, I didn't think I was very threatening. I wasn't like very big. I mean, I'm bigger now than I was when I was a kid, but I was like a skinny kid. Yeah. I was like a small, skinny kid. I would be by myself usually because I didn't roll with a team or nothing like that. So I was like usually by myself, and I would just get like crazy attention, and I would get it across the board. Like, it wasn't necessarily like just like quote unquote white folks. It would be pretty much anybody. And then the other thing too is in the child welfare system, I went in when I was 10, and I was with family members initially, but then when they needed to place me outside of family members, they told me that they have this term for young black males in particular, and it's called hard to place. And it's like, yeah, you can't go into foster care because you're hard to place.
So you were hearing that as a kid?
Right away, yeah.
And, yo, man.
And then I was like, well, what is hard to place? And I started getting into it. And they were like, well, it's not enough beds for like kids like you. And I'm like, kids like me? Like, I'm just a kid, you know? I'm just 11 years old or 12 years old. What does it mean, like kids like me? And they were trying to basically say black boys that can become black men are, you know, nobody wants to put them in their house.
That can become black men, threatening black men who can become whatever. To what degree did you take that on a little bit, just as like a, listen, man, if you're gonna call me hard to place, then, because I didn't ever see this with you, but if you're gonna call me hard to place, then I'm gonna be hard. I'm gonna put like a tough demeanor up or something. Did you remember ever doing that, or? I
mean, not really, to be honest. I mean, the thing about it is, I grew up in North Philadelphia. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, I don't have to act a certain way. If I get into a challenging situation, I need to be challenging. I could be challenging. You know, if I need to scheme, I can scheme. You know what I mean? The thing about me that what I would understand is that, you know, a guy like me, I'm gonna use my mind before I'm physical anyway. So the whole threatening idea, I'm like, are you really afraid of my mind? You know, as opposed to me doing something physical or stealing something.
Okay, so I'm looking at this, right? And I'm thinking that, you know, we put a certain lens on and we see people a certain way. And the more we see people a certain way, the more things turn out in some kinds of ways. You know, because that's just kind of how it is. Like, it's harder to develop responses to things when we don't have great clarity. To what degree are you different? We go back to this time.
Different than what?
Different than other people around you, like your siblings, other people that you saw, and who were in foster care, and like, to what degree are you? To what degree is it here? And the reason I'm asking you this is because so this is a sociology class. And we generally aren't interested in a single individual story. Like, I don't need your single story. You're just that's not what stands out for us. What stands out is a whole group of people. And then I want to know what happens to the entire group of people. So we know, for example, if you grow up poor, you're more likely to have certain challenges, and you're more likely to respond in certain ways to things than if you grew up wealthy, right? You'll commit other crimes if you're wealthy and other crimes if you're poor. I just want to ask you this, just out of curiosity, to hear what you say. To what degree are you standing here because of something deep inside of you, balanced out with, to what degree are you here because the system stepped in and kind of took care of you a little bit? Like you said, the system spent like $100,000 on you before you ever got to Penn State.
Yeah, well, here's the interesting thing about my story. So I was removed from my mother's home because of neglect. They considered my mom to be neglecting us, but I didn't experience physical abuse in a home until they placed me into a home.
In a foster home.
And it was with my family member.
Oh, I got you.
And that's when I got, was getting physically abused. And they didn't remove me from that home. They basically made me stay there, and in terms of introduction to like street life, that was my third placement. I wasn't out in the streets when I was at my mom's house. She kept us in the house, kept us with her. But when I got to my third placement, which was a foster home placement, it was like maybe 10 kids in that place, bunch of hard to place kids, and we were exposed to all types of crazy stuff, and they didn't take us out of that house either. And so for me, I realized, I'm like, these guys don't do a good job raising kids either. Like the system was not doing a great job raising these kids that they took from their parents. And so that's why I was saying, when I was telling you about the numbers, it's like, I'm like, well, and they were paying, but they were paying for those things. So it's like, well, why wouldn't you just invest in this woman that you say is neglecting when really she just doesn't have the resources she needs? Why wouldn't you just invest in her and that family? That may be your best shot at these kids, doing well.
Okay, so your organization, that's the approach that you all take in the organization?
Pretty much. I mean, it's more complex than that, right? But essentially what we're saying is you should invest in communities' ability to raise children because the system doesn't know how to raise children. I mean, they can do enforcement. System's pretty good at oh, you need us to run and catch somebody or investigate somebody. They can do that. But when it comes to actually raising children, helping families, they just don't typically do a good job with that.
So your idea is that's where the investment, we as a society would be, what we want is for people to stay in the center lane. We want kids to be socialized enough to stay in the center lane. We want families to do what they need to do to keep their kids in the center lane. We want, because that makes it better for everybody. If we don't have delinquency, we don't have problems. We just whatever we got to do to make that happen. So we want the outliers to come as close to the center as possible. Okay.
A better way to explain it is think about public health, like disease control. Part of the way public health happens is we empower communities to be able to help themselves protect from disease, right? We don't typically go out and find the people who got a disease but aren't treating it right and lock them up or do that sort of thing, because we realize that actually people will hide the disease, and then it'll spread like wildfire and then we'll all be at risk. So the public health approach to disease control is we've got to bring the community in, we've got to be partnered with the community, we've got to have the community on board, understanding the disease, how it works, and then understanding the treatment, how it works, and then administering, even in some cases, the treatment, right? So that we all stay healthy.
Okay, so now I'm gonna come to the two of you. I want to see if you have a question here. So going back to the issue of race. So race matters because there appears to be some, it's off kilter somehow. It appears to be off kilter. And so then we need to really kind of try to bring us back into, maybe we're missing a lot of stuff about white kids or Hispanic kids or Asian kids that we could be looking at because we're busy looking at the black kids. Or something. I don't know.
Or they could be totally fine.
Yep.
Right? Even with instances of abuse or neglect, they could be totally fine down the road, but this community just doesn't get that benefit.
Yeah, I got you. Yep. Okay.
Right? I mean, I think sometimes this stuff, some of it works itself out. Egregious situations, and I think I don't have to say that, but egregious situations you got to respond to.
Yeah.
Situations of abuse that are clear cut and not neglect, we have to respond to those things right away, because that's just those are assaults, those are problems, right? But we get into an area of how people are raising children or how they're operating their family, particularly in poverty and things like that. It's nuanced, and governments just don't do a good job raising children.
And it's not the government's job. I mean, we've set up this world in which we've decided that increasingly, especially in the U.S., it's nuclear families more so than anything. And so if the nuclear family, which is small, has a problem, and life is stressful, man. You have divorce, you have unemployment, you have things, you have this, you have that. You have someone struggling with alcohol for a hot minute. It's like it's so easy for things to break down, either for a few weeks or a month or a few years or whatever, and there's no ability to kind of step in and fix that, because that's just kind of the need. Well, there's not that there's no ability, but it becomes very difficult. Yeah, government, that's not what government does.
Yeah, and I mean, you might even see the rules now with some employers. If they found out that one of their employees has an alcohol issue, right, they can't fire them. They say you can't fire them because you can't send them out there. You got to kind of take care of them first, and then send them out there. With parents, they don't even get that sort of benefit. But if they were employed, they would sort of get that benefit, right? So you could tell that the system's a little off, right?
It sounds like you guys intervene kind of after the phone call. Am I understand that correctly, or before?
So we're a nonprofit organization, so we don't intervene at all. We run a series of programs. Our flagship program is called Healthy Families America, and this is a home visiting program. Operates in 500 sites across the country. And the second that a family that may have these challenges, may face some poverty challenges, some employment or mental health challenges, the second that they know that they're going to have a child, we can get involved. So we're a prevention organization. Our idea is to get involved with families before they ever come on the radar with the system. And then we advocate for policies that actually help families thrive. So.
Yeah. Well, that was going to be my next question is, I mean, I'm sure that you put a lot of thought to this at this point, but what do you think that like we could change with the current system to kind of make it less, one, about race, and two, less about just ripping the kid out of the system and leaving the parents, to do whatever they're going to do?
Yeah, I think one of the main things we have to do is destigmatize parenting. I think anybody that is a parent, the second you become a parent is like, are you a good parent or a bad one? Like that, and it's like, do we need to come in there and take your kid or not? Just let us know right now. Like, are you doing enough to keep this kid, or should we take him from you? Like that's sort of like the pressure. And I think it stops people from actually having children. I think people get really fearful and decide, maybe this is not for me. It's just too complex, too complicated. And I think that that's a problem. I think our country suffers because of it.
Well, you're a parent. I mean, you have bad days, right? As a father.
Yes, I do.
And if you're judged only on the basis of your bad day, and if you accidentally step over a certain line, it's like, man, you can have 364 great days, but one day when you just crossed over a line a little bit, and then.
Yeah, I mean, my wife and I mean, exactly what you're saying. We probably every single day, multiple times a day, constantly asking each other, ourselves, whatever it is, are we doing a good job? Are we doing the right thing? Is this the right way to approach this? And it's like every situation, I mean, like you were saying, is nuanced. So it's like, okay, how do we approach this situation? How do we want to deal with this, issue? And yeah, it is very complicated. It's a lot of stress, but I mean, at the end of the day, also, it's pretty awesome. I do like it.
As a black man, I did go through some child abuse, and now I'm going into law enforcement. And of course, I didn't really trust the system. So, of course, at times I lied when I was asked certain questions. And so as I'm going into law enforcement and doing things of that nature, of course, I become a mandated reporter and also become someone that people may look up to or look to for help. How would you advise people to be a space and be a person that someone can openly go to and actually ask for help rather than hiding with and that you're trying to like break the family apart and things of that nature?
Yeah, I think good question, and it's an honorable question as well because you're thinking ahead. And I think you should probably stay on that path. That I think you want to be proactive. I think if you get into a crisis situation, you're gonna have to make judgment calls like on the spot. But I think the best advice is, get the knowledge and get the information before you enter a crisis situation, right? So if you understand the dynamics of family, understand the dynamics of the families in the communities that you may be in, then you can make a better judgment. My advice is just learn about what families are actually going through. A lot of times people end up in these roles, they don't spend time with families. And sometimes they're just like yourself. They're young folks, they're maybe starting out their career and they're just listening to the rules and they're reading on paper, but they don't know people's actual lives. They run into culture when they get out there. They run into religion when they get out there. History of family when they get out there, and they get stuck. So I would say, make time to learn about the families and the communities that you're going to be serving.
Hey, how about this? What about like kind of the stereotype of fathers and not being like? What about investing in fathers in the home? Like really, the role of fathers, the key.
Yeah, dude, listen, the father thing is a whole nother thing because just how, you said, why do we have to talk about race, right? If you go deeper in the data, you're going to say, we definitely got to talk about fathers.
And black fathers.
Just fathers,
all
fathers in general. If you go through the numbers,
Yeah, I
right?
got you.
Because there is a disproportionate bias against fathers. Like a father that's investigated, it's going to be more likely to be substantiated than a mother that's investigated for sure.
Yeah,
because there's an assumption that a father just doesn't know what to do. Father is inadequate. A father, whatever. It's just there's just a lot of bias against fathers in general. And then the race thing in terms of black fathers as well, right? I think in society, because of the kind of stigma and attention that's been given to families, black fathers, we think we know. Wow, we know what they're about. You're probably a rapper, right? I mean,
Yeah, exactly. Or an
basketball player or
athlete
something
or
like that.
whatever.
Yeah, of course.
And the stigma of black father, the absentee black father, and it's how hard it is to break through that.
Yeah, and that's a headline, right? This is not a truth, right? And what happens is
hang on. It is a truth. There are far greater numbers of single parent families than we've ever had, but still.
No, you said far greater numbers.
Yeah.
But the overwhelming majority are there.
It's not true.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And what I was just about to say, that because you reach a certain threshold in your data, it becomes the headline. If you're at 25% absentee, right?
That's right.
But you still got 75% of those fathers that are there that are doing the job, right? You're just not focusing on that.
So it becomes the problem of absentee fathers.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was literally just about to ask that. I was going to say, like, in the past hour, prior to when you had just brought it up, I hadn't heard the word father come up like once in the past hour. So I was going to say, like, when we see statistics that suggest that black families experience fatherlessness at 2 to 3 times the average white family does. I mean, you kind of already answered what I was going to ask about it, but I was going to say, in what ways might your organization rather support that? Granted, how you said that your organization supports families directly. Yeah,
sorry to cut you off, but that's part of our approach as well. I mean, we like to say we have a comprehensive approach, because when we focus on families and we focus on family strengthening, this is going to be a key issue. Is what about the dynamic between the father and the family? What about the pushing down some of the stigma that comes with fathering? In particular communities, you got to be willing to address those things. You got to be able to address those things, and it takes investment, right? Because the situation is the way it is because there's been investment to create it, right? Talk about law enforcement, you talk about targeting. Like, a lot of this has been systemic, and so to change that, you're gonna have to make some investments in fathers, and we do. Our organization makes a significant investment in fathers. And a father's ability to be a part of their family's life.
How do y'all's experiences with education, like, in your background, how do those things, because, like, coming from a poor background or foster care or gang violence or whatever you've been through, and then going to college and still having to deal with some of that stuff back home, how do you, like, balance that mental weight or, like, that drive?
I mean, it's a lot. It's really stressful. Dealing with, like, family dynamics, dealing with work, with school, all of that, all on top of itself. I know I actually moved my mom and my brothers out with me. They lived with me for a while, and I was taking care of them, and that was a whole thing, trying to pay to get them out here, trying to get them out of, California, where it's, ungodly expensive by itself, but also with the poverty on top of that. It was a lot, and I spent a lot of money, a lot of debt to try to take care of my family. And then I also have my current family and school, like you said, and work and everything. So it's like, and Addie, it's a similar thing that you said earlier. It's like it's the issues that are compounded. It's like so many things that we don't see. A lot of people, it's like, well, I wouldn't do that. Well, you're not in this situation where there's a layering of issues that just compound and they just keep going.
For me, this is just for me, bro. Education, saving grace. Education was the 100% saving grace for me. It took me out of the environment initially, so coming out to Penn State. But on top of that, it gave me some tools. So when I went back home, I wasn't I wasn't like high and dry, like why I couldn't do anything. I was able to I started a business. I started a real estate business when I got back home. I ran for public office back in my neighborhood, right? And so I could be a part of the solution. You know what I mean? And that raises self-esteem. You know what I'm saying? When things get challenging, that also gives you something to lose. I think that has to happen too. I think sometimes you grow up in a challenging situation and you got nothing to lose, you act like you got nothing to lose. You know what I mean? And so I had something to lose because of my education, and then I kept, advancing thanks to the help of this guy right here. I kept, getting more education, accumulating more things to lose, and now I got so much to lose, I don't even have arguments.
What do you want people to know from this conversation? Just like 30 seconds. Like, what do you hope people take away?
I mean, I just hope that people, I think a big thing in this class, a big theme is empathy. I think they really have to try to open their eyes. Sometimes I know people like to say they want to be blind to race, but I think that's the exact opposite of what they should be doing. They should be acknowledging race. You should be acknowledging that there are struggles that you might have never experienced that people are experiencing by the second, and it's something that can be extremely overwhelming. And I mean, I don't expect anyone to just be able to understand, but to just kind of, sort of try to come from a place of understanding, try to put yourself out there in situations so that you can always be learning. And I think that's one of the biggest things, to always try to learn. For me, I agree, education is one of the biggest and most important aspects of my life, because it's one of the only things that could get me out of my situations. And I just feel like that's something that is so important to acknowledge, and I'm super grateful to have, because I know in foreign countries that's not something that is the case.